Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading. Welcome into September. It is September the 1st, and we are reading together in 1 Kings chapter 7, which is going to give us some details concerning Solomon's own palace. In the previous chapters, in 5 and 6, the discussion has been the building of Yahweh's house. Now we're going to read some details about Solomon's house that he built for himself. And we're also going to see some more details about other furnishings and things that were associated with the temple. That's going to finish up chapter 7. We're going to see a specific man who was hired to come in to do a lot of the bronze work. And that's all found here in chapter 7. So let's go. Let me go ahead and get the screen up get on the screen for us the text of 1 Kings chapter 7. Again, we've seen in 5 and 6, Yahweh's temple being built, all the inner workings of it, most of the inside portions of the temple. Now we're going to see Solomon's house, and then some of the outside portions of the temple and some of the stuff that gets a little further away from the most holy of places. So let's read here then, 1 Kings chapter 7 and verse number 1. Solomon completed his entire palace complex after 13 years of construction. He built the house of the forest of Lebanon. It was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high on 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams on top of the pillars. It was it was paneled above with cedar at the top of the chambers that rested on 45 pillars, 15 per row. There were 3 rows of window frames facing each other in 3 tiers. All the doors and doorposts had rectangular frames, the openings facing each other in 3 tiers. He had the hall of pillars 75 feet long and 45 feet wide. A portico was in front of the pillars, and the canopy with pillars was in front of them. He made the hall of the throne where he would judge, the hall of judgment. It was paneled with cedar from floor to the rafters, and Solomon's own palace where he would live in the other courtyard behind the hall was of similar construction, and he made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, his wife. Verse number 9, all these buildings were of costly stone, cut to size and sawed with saws on the inner and outer surfaces, from foundation to coping, and from the outside of the great courtyard. The foundation was made of large, costly stones, 12 and 15 feet long. Above were also costly stones, cut to size, as well as cedar wood. Around the great courtyard, as well as the inner courtyard of Yahweh's temple and the portico of the temple, were 3 rows of dressed stones and a row of trimmed cedar beams. King Solomon had Hiram, or in First Chronicles, I believe it is, there is a variant that this was Huram, but whoever this was a man brought from Tyre, not to be confused, I believe, with King Hiram. I think that these are 2 different people. This particular person is told he was a widow's son from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a bronze craftsman. Hiram had great skill, understanding, and knowledge to do every kind of bronze work. So he came to King Solomon and carried out all his work. He cast 2 bronze pillars, each 27 feet high and 18 feet in circumference. He also made 2 capitals of cast bronze, and I should note real fast, this is now we're referencing back to the things he made for the temple. So 15 through 40 is about things made for the temple by this man Hiram. So verse 15 again, he cast 2 bronze pillars, each 27 feet high and 18 feet in circumference. He also made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on top of the pillars. 7.5 feet was the height of the first capital, and 7.5 feet was also the height of the second capital. The capitals on top of the pillars had gratings of lattice work, wreaths made of chain work, 7 for the first capital and 7 for the second. He made the pillars with 2 encircling rows of pomegranates on the one grating to cover the capital on top. He did the same for the second capital. And the capitals on top of the pillars in the portico were shaped like lilies, 6 feet high. The capitals on the 2 pillars were also immediately above the rounded surface next to the grating. and 200 pomegranates were in rows encircling each capital. He set up the pillars at the portico of the sanctuary. He set up the right pillar and named it Jachin. Then he set up the left pillar and named it Boaz. The tops of the pillars were shaped like lilies. Then the work of the pillars was completed. He made the cast metal basin, 15 feet from brim to brim, perfectly round. It was 7.5 feet tall and 45 feet in circumference. Ornamental gourds encircled it below the brim, 10 every half yard, and completely encircling the basin. The gourds were cast in 2 rows when the basin was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The base was on top of them, and all their hindquarters were toward the center. The basin was 3 inches thick, and its rim was fashioned like the rim of a cup or of a lily blossom. It held 11,000 gallons. Then he made 10 bronze water carts. Each water cart was 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4.5 feet high. This was the design of the carts. They had frames. The frames were between the cross pieces, and on the frames between the cross pieces were lions, oxen, and cherubim. On the cross pieces, there was a pedestal above, and below the lions and oxen were wreaths of hanging work. Each cart had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles. Underneath the 4 corners of the basin were cast supports, each next to a wreath. The water cart's opening inside the crown on top was 18 inches wide. The opening was round, made as a pedestal, 27 inches wide. On it were carvings, but their frames were square, not round. There were 4 wheels under the frames, and the wheel axles were part of the water cart. Each wheel was 27 inches tall. The wheel's design was similar to that of chariot wheels. Their axles, rims, spokes, and hubs were all of cast metal. 4 supports were at the 4 corners of each cart. Each support was one piece with the water cart. At the top of the cart was a band 9 inches high encircling it. Also at the top of the cart, its braces and its frames were one piece with it. He engraved cherubim, lions, and palm trees on the plates of its braces and on its frames, wherever they had space, with encircling wreaths. In this way, he made the 10 water carts using the same casting, dimensions, and shape for all of them. Then he made 10 bronze basins. Each basin held 220 gallons, and each was 6 feet wide. 1 basin for each of the 10 water carts. He set 5 water carts on the right side of the temple and 5 on the left side. He put the basin near the right side of the temple toward the southeast. Then Hiram made the basins, the shovels, and the sprinkling basins. So Hiram finished all the work that he was doing for King Solomon on Yahweh's temple. 2 pillars, bowls for the capitals that were on top of the 2 pillars, the 2 gratings for covering both bowls of the capitals that were on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 gratings, 2 rows of pomegranates for each grating, covering both capitals bowls on top of the pillars, the 10 water carts, the 10 basins on the water carts, the basin, the 12 oxen underneath the basin, the pots, shovels, and sprinkling basins. All the utensils that Hiram made for King Solomon at Yahweh's temple were made of burnished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the Jordan Valley near Succoth and Zarethan. Solomon left the utensils unweighed because there were so many. The weight of bronze was not determined. Solomon made all the equipment in Yahweh's temple. Solomon also made all the equipment in the Yahweh's temple. The gold altar, the gold table of the bread of the presence was placed on, the pure gold lampstands in front of the inner sanctuary, 5 on the right and 5 on the left, the gold flowers, lamps, and tongs, the pure gold ceremonial bowls, wick trimmers, sprinkling basins, ladles, and fire pans. and the gold hinges for the doors for the inner temple, that is the most holy place, and for the doors of the temple sanctuary. So all the work Solomon did for Yahweh's temple was completed. Then Solomon brought in the consecrated things of his father David, the silver, the gold, and the utensils, and put them in the treasuries of Yahweh's temple. And that is the reading of 1 Kings chapter 7. Again, we have a couple of things being described for us here. The first thing that is mentioned is Solomon's incredible palace complex. It was a massive, absolutely massive building, much larger, it seems, than the temple itself. But not only do we have just one building, but it seems, if I'm reading this right, at least two, if not three different buildings are being described here. One of them would be the house of the force of Lebanon, and that's mentioned in verse number 2. Another one seems to be described in verse number 8, the Solomon's own palace where he would live, and then also a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, his wife. So again, at least two, if we understand the house of the cedar of Lebanon and Solomon's palace as being the same one, that would be one building, although it almost reads like they're two separate buildings. And then the second or third one, depending again how you read that, would be this house that Solomon made for his, I guess, his favorite wife, which would be Pharaoh's daughter. Now, one of the things that is mentioned, and really a lot of the stuff that's mentioned regarding how the temple was made, is described for Solomon's house as well. Now, I will draw this to our attention just to be something to think about. It says here that that completing Solomon's entire palace complex, so all these different buildings, took 13 years. How long did it take the temple to be built? Well, it took 7 years. Here's what I'm wondering. Why did it take nearly twice as long to build Solomon's temple complex as it did the temple? Now, very practically speaking, it could be that it's because this temple complex was, by some estimations, 4 times larger than the temple. So it could purely be a practical issue. But why the need maybe to make something so big? It seems that the instructions for the temple, they were not Solomon. He did not come up with this. It seems, reading later in Chronicles, that it was something that David had put together, the instructions for the building of the temple. But why the need for Solomon to build something so much greater for himself? I don't know if we can draw an absolute conclusion based upon that, but I will suggest that maybe we need to add this to the running list of seeds of trouble that might be popping up in the descriptions of various things that Solomon has done. Again, one of the seeds of trouble being the marrying of the daughter of Pharaoh, another one being the worshiping on high places, another one being the accumulation of horses and chariots. Here, maybe another one being the fact that he thought his dwelling place needed to be even larger and greater than the dwelling place for Yahweh. Just some things to keep in mind to consider as we continue working our way and adding color to this picture that Scripture is painting for us of Solomon. In verse number 13, we see that we have another man named, just coincidentally, again, here in Kings, his name is Hiram. In Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 4, verse 11, specifically, his name is Huram. So this man, whatever his name is, whether it's Hiram or Huram, he is someone who is very skilled with bronze working. Very interesting. He's also half Jewish. The text says that his mother was from the tribe of Naphtali, although he had a father that was from Tyre. But he's very skilled in bronze, and he's brought in to create all these different furnishings that would be found in the outer portion of the temple. Everything that's described here, whether it be the pillars or the things that are on top of the pillars, the capitals, or the basin, the water carts and the basins in them, all of these things would have been further away from the holy place. Because remember, the choice of covering for everything on the inner portion of the temple was in gold. And we can understand that the things closest to God would be in the most precious material. And then as we get a little further away from that, it would be Still great material, but a little less precious because, again, it's further away from God. Those things are described in verses 1 through 40, and then we have a list of the completed projects by Hiram in verses 41 through 45. Again, all the things that are described in 15 through 40 are summarized in 41 through 45. And then we also have at the end just another reflection upon the gold things. Again, we've just mentioned all these bronze things, but here now the author feels the need to remind us of all the gold that was in the temple. And again, all the things that are mentioned there are things that were in the sanctuary itself, or even in the inner sanctuary, which is the most holy place. The work Solomon did in Yahweh's temple was completed, and then he actually ends up bringing things that his father had collected, brought them to and put them into Yahweh's temple as well. So that's the content that we have here in the 51 verses of 1 Kings chapter 7. But here's just a practical question that we might ask about this text. Why? Why the need to describe everything that is written in chapters 5, 6, and 7? Why the need to describe that? Why the need to take up space and ink, just describing in such intricate detail what happened in the past? Because remember, if we're reading this text as being something that was introduced to the people during the time of the exile, what good does it do for them? These things have already happened. It's not like these are instructions that were written to be given to someone in order to complete the temple. This writing is looking backwards at what did take place. So why the need to give this sort of intricate detail about the temple? Well, I would suggest this. I would suggest that it shows how glorious Yahweh's house was. Again, it's not glorious because of the quantity of it. It was not a huge place. If you weren't reading along with us yesterday, I went on Google Maps and measured our church building, and our church building from back to front, or front to back, is 98 feet long, and then it is about 36 feet wide. So the dimensions of it are very close to the size of the temple itself. So it wasn't that it was just a massive building. I would not consider our church building to be a massive building, especially compared to other things, even just within the town of Loudon. Think about the courthouse and how massive of a structure that is. But it wasn't about the quantity. It was about the quality of it and about the purpose of it. It was truly a magnificent building for the materials that were used in its construction. But even more so, it was what it represented. And what it represented was the presence of Yahweh among his people. But again, why tell those who are in exile about it? Well, because that might be wondering then, well, why did all the bad stuff that we've heard about or that we experienced, why did that happen to it? Why was the temple ransacked? Why did God allow for his house that was so beautiful and glorious? How could he allow it to be overrun by pagans, uncircumcised pagans? Well, it gets back to chapter 6 and verses 11 to 13. Chapter 6, 11 to 13, we need to remember that the word of Yahweh came to Solomon. As for this temple you are building, if you walk in my statutes, observe my ordinances, and keep all my covenants by walking in them, I will fulfill my promise to you, which I made to your father David. I will dwell among the Israelites and not abandon my people Israel. Basically, I will dwell in this house. I will make it glorious so long as you are faithful to me. The very fact that the exiles were reading this text answers the question of whether or not they were faithful. But the answer, unfortunately, was no. No, they were not. They were not faithful. So maybe this text was written and this detail was all given to motivate the people to change and to become dedicated to Yahweh, to not forsake him even within a foreign land, but to worship him, to be committed to him, and to follow him in everything that they were to do. That might be part of the reason why this was given, not just simply as a history lesson, but to remind the people of the glories of God and just how seriously God takes covenant loyalty and covenant faithfulness. That if they don't show that, then this glorious place, its glory would be lost. If you have any questions or comments about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below, and look forward to reading with you again tomorrow as we get into this really cool text of the dedication of the temple, and that'll be in chapter 8 tomorrow. Very much looking forward to reading that with you then. Have a great rest of your Friday, everyone. Take care, and God bless.